is that what it's about is your son, Jesus Christ. It's not really about the Christmas gifts. It's not about the trees. It's not about putting the lights on the building. And all of that's fun and all of that's great. But the reality is that what Christmas is truly about is the greatest gift ever given. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And Lord, that's it. You gave your Son. It was the best Christmas present we ever got. Because in his life, death, and resurrection, we came to realize salvation. We have hope because of that little child coming to earth 2,000 years ago to pay the penalty for our sins and to redeem us. You know, it's amazing how with all the different stages of our lives, we have an insatiable desire to make sense out of life, don't we? To make some sense out of the details. That I don't want anything to be random. I want everything to make sense. I want it all to fit together in such a way that I can stand back and look at my life. And if I had a tree right here, I mean, we don't have any trees in the building, but there's the one out there. And that tree represented my life for just a second, and everything fits. And all the points connect, and all the dots connect, and everything that happens to me, I know exactly where it goes, and I can say, wow, everything makes sense in my life. I can point to that, and this is good, and this is good, and this all makes sense, and I can understand all the details. And it is in all of us, isn't it? It isn't just a Christian thing or a religious thing. We all just want life to make sense. We met because we're supposed to meet, and then we got engaged, and then I got that cool promotion, and my kid graduated from school, and we had the birth of a child, and well, hopefully it happened the other way around. You had a birth of a child, and then your kid graduated from school. Every time somebody hands me an event, or I experience an event, I know exactly where it goes, and I want to make sure everything fits. In fact, this is just so much a part of human nature, but that in every culture and every language, there's actually terminology that we use. That we don't think about it. I mean, we don't think about this. This is something that we're just so used to. We're so part of us. And in fact, you don't want to think about these phrases too much because they begin to fall apart if you do. But we use terminologies to reinforce the idea that everything has a purpose. Everything's going somewhere, and there really isn't any random events. That someday we'll be able to look back on our lives and everything will make it fit together. For example, we say things like, well, everything happens for a reason. You ever say that? Have you ever heard somebody say that? And me and my skeptical, I don't do this, but I want to say, really? Everything happens for a reason? Again, you don't start poking holes in it because it begins to fall apart, but there's something in you, something in me that wants to believe. Well, even though we don't understand it now, everything happens for a reason. I don't believe in coincidence. You've said that, or somebody said it. Well, what a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. What does that mean? Well, I don't know. Just don't believe in them. And I don't think there's any sort of I think there's some sort of cosmic force. A lot of the world calls it karma. But there's, I don't think there's any condenses, and I think it's all fits together, and you just haven't met the right person yet. Maybe you're single and you're not married, and so you're not married, and so, well, everything happens for a reason. God's just not brought the right person into my life yet. Now, what does that mean? It means someday. Well, wait. Based on what? I don't know. Don't ask me any hard questions. Someday, if you just haven't met the right person yet, there's just, it goes together. I guess it wasn't meant to be. Well, the reason it didn't work out, it's not your fault. It's not his fault. And it's not her fault. It just wasn't meant to be. But somewhere out there, there's a meant to be, and they're put everything together. And so the reason it didn't work out for you, and there's another one we say, well, I guess that just didn't work out for you. It just doesn't meant to be because there's something in you and there's something in me. We all want it to fit together. Now, that's true of any kind of sort of negative things in life. And that's true of the fun things in life. And of course, it worked out. Things work out. It'll all work out. We say, well, it'll all work out. Well, the problem with that is we don't know what we're basing that on. We don't ask many questions. It'll work out. And we just don't want it to fit together. And where the really comes into play is someone hits a big bump in life and something really bad happens. The doctor calls, you need to come in. We've found a lump. Or Your wife, your kid comes in, Dad, my girlfriend's pregnant. Or, looks like we may lose the baby. Or, honey, I want a divorce. Or your boss, well, we just no longer need your services anymore. And we're really bad about selling somebody going through that. Well, it'll all work out. Everything works out. Everything's for the good. Everything's for the better. And so we start asking why. Well, why do you think that happened? Why do you think God allowed that? Or why do you? And we want to know why. And when you're facing a tragedy, when you're facing something that just creates extraordinary pain, there's something in you that wants to figure out, where in the world do I hang this in the order of my life? I mean, don't you get that? Don't you understand? Do you not go through that? Or maybe I'm the only one. Maybe I'm the only one who goes through these kind of thoughts. When something bad happens, I want to make sense out of it. I want to see the plan book. And so, okay, God, if this wasn't in my plan, and I don't want this to lack purpose, I want this to make sense. Right now, it doesn't make sense. And not only do I know where to put this in my life, I don't even really want it in my life, or sickness, or any of the other things. And we ask why, and somehow we want to have purpose. You don't look at somebody in pain. I mean, hopefully you don't do this, but you don't somehow look at somebody who's going through a difficult time and say, well, that's life. What are you so upset about? It has a purpose. Stuff happens. You don't do that, because when you watch somebody you love, or even somebody at work that you don't love, but you know they're going through a difficult time, regardless of what you believe, you find yourself digging around the purpose pile of going, well, I know this looks random, but somehow, someday, maybe, you'll meet someone else, or you'll get a better job, or it's like we somehow want to help people put everything together, because it's in you. It's in me to want to have a purpose in every single circumstance of our life. Now, here's another interesting question. Why is it? I mean, what is it that in you? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? Well, see, I have a black lab. I don't think she worries about this. Okay, she gets up in the morning, or I used to have a black lab. She gets in the morning, I feed her. And when he gets in the house, and he gets on his bed, and he goes back to sleep, I don't think he lays there and says, I wonder how this nap connects to yesterday's nap and tomorrow's nap, and I wonder if one day I'll put in all the naps on the tree of my life, and those naps are all going to mysteriously come together, and it's going to be like, oh, I don't know why I slept every day. Okay, I don't really think my dog used to worry about that. I don't think any of our pets do. But there's something in you and there's something in me, and we just want it to make sense. Now, see, I bring this all up, and you're saying, okay, Pastor Mike, this is really kind of interesting, and yeah, you're hitting home a little bit, but what in the world has this got to do with Christmas? I mean, this is supposed to be a Christmas Eve service. We're supposed to have candlelight and all that stuff. Well, first off, this is a virtual reality church, and I haven't figured out how to do a candlelight service yet. I don't see a way, unless I can figure out how to all of us have the same app where we can pass a flame from each other. And so I've never been able to figure out how to do I mean, I could turn off the lights in here. All we'd have to do is set the settings so it's nighttime. But how we do candlelight, I don't know. So you're wondering what this got to do with Christmas. Well, see, Christians, we really do have a purpose. There is really a reason. Oh, it's not us. Okay? Christians believe that everybody, whether you're a Christian or not, or whether you believe in God or not, that God has a purpose. And that God is involved in history, and that God sees things spiritually, and God brings order out of chaos, and God brings design into things that seem to have no design. And this thing in you that wants to find sense and make sense out of everything in life, it's a God thing. Because it's a reflection of the image of God in you. And you can't get away from it. In fact, it's so deep in you, for some of you, this is how you actually came to faith. Because you began to see that God worked out a purpose. Do we, as human beings, always understand his purpose? Heavens, no. I don't. I guarantee you God does things that I just don't get. Okay? But the Bible does say that his ways are not my ways. His thoughts are high above my thoughts. They're way beyond what I can comprehend. And I'm kind of okay with that. Because let's be honest, If if I was equal to God and God ways weren't wiser than mine, I'd be a little worried. Okay? Because, I do things like several years ago, I decided I got this bright idea that we were going to make Thanksgiving dinner. And so I was single, and so I had three roommates. And so I got the brilliant idea that I wanted leftovers. I was tired of going to dinner at other people's houses and have Thanksgiving, and you get no way. And I was 21, 22, 23. And so I went out and I bought a jack-o'-lantern. You guys, if you're not from the United States, you may not understand, but jack-o'-lantern is this giant pumpkin, right? It's what you use to carve to make decorations with. Advice: although you can make pumpkin pie with them, you will make a lot of pumpkin pie with them, which I didn't think about. So I did it from scratch. I got the pumpkin and I carved it out and cleaned it out, and I baked and salted the pumpkin seeds so that we could have roasted pumpkin seeds, and I blended all the pumpkin. I boiled the pumpkin and skinned it and did all the things you have to do to make a pumpkin into a pumpkin pie. There's only one small drawback. Right? I ended up making 21 pumpkin pies, 4 loaves of pumpkin bread, pumpkin muffins, pumpkin cookies, and pumpkin soup. Now, guys, let's face it. You really want God to be no smarter than that? Because I don't. I'm glad that God is a whole lot smarter than that. That God is a whole lot wiser than I am. That God is a lot more powerful than I am. I mean, I'm kind of glad that I'm not the one who's responsible for creating the universe. So I have no problem understanding that, yes, God's ways are high above my ways, and I don't get it. And so sometimes the plan that he works out is way beyond what I think. Okay? My dog doesn't understand my ways. Why should you think that I would understand God's ways completely? Okay? It's part of being created in his image. Now, because you're living life and doing your thing and trying to be completely autonomous, all I need is me and all I need is my stuff, and you're working really, really, really hard just to be autonomous, and you weren't attached to any other bigger purpose, any other bigger plan, and it was all about you. And then at some point in your life, it was like a pebble in your shoe. And then it was just this nagging sense of, this isn't enough. That's got to be more. And the agonizing sense of purpose, it just began to cloud your fun and cloud your thrills and cloud your lifestyle. And everything that you were doing, and you could find yourself successful, and you'd find yourself having plenty of relationships, and at the end of the day, at the end of the week, I'm empty because it doesn't seem to be connected to anything. See, that's the image of God at work. The image of God that says there is a purpose, there is a plan, and you don't always know what it is. And sometimes it all fits together perfectly, and other times you're just not going to know where to fit it. You're looking at the tree, at the purpose of your life, and you're like, I don't know what branch to put this decoration on. I don't know where to put this aspect of my life, because it doesn't seem to be connected to anything else. But the thing is, that thing in you that belongs to that longs to connect the dots, that's the image of God in you. Because God says, I'm a God of order, purpose, and I'm a God that connects things, and you don't know how they connect, but I see the whole picture, and I will eventually bring about the thing that you know intuitively is true, that things work out, things move forward, good things come from bad things are redeemed, and good things result. Because ultimately, God's plan is successful. Along the way, we may not get it. Now, all of that collides with the Christmas story. You see, it is tied to the Christmas story. Because the Christmas story, in many ways, is the perfect example of God stepping into history, seemingly random life, the chaos of life, the insignificance, the meaningless of life, God dipping down and reminding the world that there is a plan, there is a design, that history goes forward, that God is the God of history. And the Christian Christmas story is the picture of God intervening, coming down and being involved with the affairs of man and doing it in such a way that it becomes absolutely unmissable that there is a God who understands and there is a God who knows we're here and there is a God who cares about us. So what I want to do, I want to read a portion of the Christmas story, and then I want us to come back to the whole idea and talk about how it connects with each of our lives. And I'm going to read from the book of Luke. Luke chapter 1 is where we'll find the Christmas story. The Christmas story of Luke's is on Luke's account. Okay. So, and if you have a Bible, please turn to Luke chapter 1. Luke chapter 1 is the first chapter, yes, of the book of Luke. And if you go to you go to the beginning of the New Testament, you got Matthew, Mark, Luke. It's the third book in. You know, I realize that most of you already know this, but I'm just making sure. Because we've got some people on live stream, and I don't know, because that doesn't really tell me names. Usually, it just tells me there's somebody. Okay. So, here we are in the book of Luke. If you're a Bible person or church person, let me clear up something for when you were in college. If you went to college, at some point in college, you had a professor who told you, well, basically just discounted the whole Bible. I did. I had one of those professors. My sophomore year in college, I had the Bible professor, the religion professor, who taught Bible, who was also the pastor of Mars Hill Baptist Church, First Baptist Church in Mars Hill, who told us the Bible was a bunch of fairy tales and none of it was real. It was just a book of fiction and just stories, and none of it really ever happened. I can't tell you how many people's faith he had destroyed. And that kind of kicks the legs out from underneath your faith when it comes to the Bible. And I just want you to know that English professor, if it was an English professor or the religious professor, is probably sitting in church today somewhere feeling bad about the fact that he misled you. If it was, and with the idea that the Bible, somebody told you in college, and the person that told you, they may not even believe that anymore. Now, I believe the Old Testament and the New Testament, Chad, so we're not going to go into that. I'm not going to debate on them, okay, at this point, because that's kind of like chasing a rabbit, and I don't chase rabbits. So, but if you've never moved beyond the whole idea of the Bible, about the idea about the Bible, so real quickly, the Bible is not a book. The Bible is not even a collection. The Bible is simply a collection of ancient manuscripts, and they were put together in a book or in a binder so they were convenient, and we pick it up and read it and make it portable. And one of those ancient manuscripts was written in the 1st century. In fact, none of the New Testament was written past about 90 AD. Yes, the last book was written about 90 AD. 90 years after Jesus, about 60 years after Jesus' death. Okay? So it's not even, we're talking about the next group. And some of those people who, when some of this was written, were around. So there were eyewitnesses to all of this. And they could have just said, no, no, no. So the bottom line is, if you don't know and you need to talk about Scripture, okay, I recommend you actually do some time to read it. Don't just take what everybody else says. Please, spend some time actually reading the New Testament. Really understand it. And see, my thing with the New Testament, if you tell me, well, I believe the New Testament, Pastor Mike, but the Old Testament just is so far-fetched. Well, here's the small problem with that, and I'm without going off on this tangent too far. The bottom line is that Jesus believed the Old Testament. In fact, he calls it truth. So if Jesus, who we believe to be the Son of God, who claims to be the Son of God, who our faith revolves around him, you would think that since he created the world himself, he was the agent of creation, he's been there. Jesus didn't have a beginning. He never has an end. He never had a beginning. Him and God the Father have been coexisted for eternity, forever. Never beginning, never ending. He would know what happened in the time of the Old Testament. So if he says that this really happened, I tend to believe Jesus was right. That's the reality. So I got two choices. I can either say, okay, Jesus didn't know what he's talking about, so therefore he couldn't be God. He couldn't be omnipotent. He couldn't have paid for his sin, and so I'm lost. Or I believe Jesus died for me. I believe he rose again on the 3rd day. I believe that he was God incarnate. And because he was God incarnate, if he says the Old Testament was true and real, and it really happened, then I tend to trust him. Okay? All right. So, and just as they were handed down to us, and so just, yeah, this happened. So Luke is writing this, right? And many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that are fulfilled among us. Many, not just me, many have sat down and tried to put together an account of the events that happened right here among us. Luke, you mean like among you, like you were there? Yeah, this happened in my lifetime, Luke says. Oh, and just as they handed down this to us by those who were from the first were eyewitnesses, the servants of the word. So what you're saying, Luke, is the stuff you're about to write down, you got this from people who saw it happen? Yeah. And with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, now remember, I'm reading from Luke, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, my most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Now, I've got news for you, folks. If that's what Luke is saying, that is not in a galaxy far, far away. It is not once upon a time. Okay? Doesn't sound like that. Abandon your brain, leave your brain at the door, and try to use your imagination. No, that's not even sound like religious stuff. Here's a guy who says, I've investigated, I've talked to the eyewitness, I want to make sure that everybody writes down an orderly account so that future generations know what happened here in our midst. Wow, I bet you didn't know that was in the Bible, did you? You should read your Bible. Luke 1:26. No, I'm serious, you should. Okay, you should get one. In fact, if you don't have one, if you'll email me, I'll figure out a way to get you one. Okay? It may take me a while because especially if you live far away from me. But we'll find a way to get you one, or find somebody in your area that can get you one. But I want you to have a Bible if you don't have one. So chapter 1, verse 26. Okay? So chapter 1, verse 26. So here's Luke now. He says, I've investigated all this. I looked into it carefully, and here's what I discovered. Okay? And then he says, in the 6th month, see the detail there isn't. Once upon a time, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, Elizabeth was one of Mary, mother of Jesus' relatives. In the 6th month of her pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. Joseph was a descendant of David. Okay? So, here's what we got going on. Okay? Imagine everything. Next phrase, as Luke is writing this down. The virgin's name was Mary. He had no idea. He had no idea what would happen in the future as a result of him telling this story. Cathedrals would be built, wars would be fought, buildings all over the world would be built, missionaries would be sent, books would be written, heretics would be burned, people would give their life in order to get this story out of the 1st century. People would give their lives in order to get the story translated into a language that the common man could understand. And Luke in the 1st century is going, well, I don't know all about all that. I just want to make sure the next generation knows what's happened here in history on the ground among us. Okay? The virgin's name is, we don't know anything much about Mary. We know that she was probably a teenager. That was pretty common in those days. The husband was usually a couple years older than the wife. Her life looked like this. Her life's pretty much planned out. She's going to get married. She's going to marry a guy that actually she hasn't really spent that much time with. Okay, she's betrothed to this guy. When she met him at the betrothal service, might have been actually the time she actually ended up spending any time with him. But you have the betrothal service, and they're committed to each other now. It's like super engagement. You can't break it. Okay, it could be broken, but basically, if you broke up during the betrothal, it was considered a divorce. It was just like you were divorced. Okay, so here she is. She's going to marry this guy, and his name is Joseph, and they would live together wherever their parents told her to live, and she would meet him maybe on her wedding, and that's what and Joseph, this is Mary. You guys, we don't know if you love each other or not, but you're betrothed. You'll work that out. But you're going to get married. You're going to have kids. You're going to give your parents some grandkids. And if you live long enough, which you probably won't, you might even get to meet your own grandchildren, and then you'll die. No one will ever know your name because you grew up in this dusty little town in the middle of nowhere, and during a time when nobody really cared about what was happening in Israel. And you would just be another nameless person who came and went and was thrown into the dustbin of history. So what? It's over. See, we think, because we know the story, but we look at it from hindsight. We look at it from the history. But for Mary, she didn't was important. She didn't think she was going to make any kind of impact because she wasn't. She was basic, a poor teenager who was betrothed. And see, the betrothal process was very different than the way we get married nowadays. Betrothal meant that you were committed to each other. Okay, you met during the betrothal, and they performed a wedding ceremony, basically married. In all but, I mean, in name. Legally, he was responsible for you. You were responsible for each other. And part of the betrothal process is that the husband would prepare a home for the wife. And in Joseph's case, he was probably building a house for her, because that was pretty common. Because then when the house was completed, they would have their year of betrothal would be over, and they would finalize the marriage and move in and become husband and wife and live as husband and wife. Right now, she's still living at home, and he's still living in his house, and probably building a house for her. But they're betrothed; they're completely committed. And so there was Mary, just another random life, random series of events, random children that would grow up. Some of them would survive, possibly many of them wouldn't, but God, in this period of history, intervened. Thanks to Luke, we know, but that God is a God who is involved, and what may seem random to us is purposeful in the mind of God, and that's why you seek purpose in your life. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you are highly favored." And we'll come back to that in a moment. The Lord is with you. Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. In other words, are you the good witch or the bad witch? I've never seen an angel. The Lord is with me. Are you the Lord? I mean, imagine how overwhelming that was. And he says, no, this is good news. The angel said to her, don't be afraid. Why? Because she was afraid. I mean, have you ever noticed that? Every time you run into an angel in the Bible, the first words out of their mouth is, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. Be not afraid. You ever wonder why? Well, I promise you it's because angels do not look like the angels on those old television programs where these nice, ethereal beings with white wings, and they're just, look like you could push them over with a strong wind. Okay? They're scary. Angels are scary. Number one, a lot of them are, they're huge. They're intimidating. They're terrifying because they are in the presence of the Most High God. Like I said, I never met an angel. I never met one in person. Blah, blah. But I promise you, they're not the little fat guys with wings that you see on the television programs or on the little fat naked little kids, cherubs. Okay, that's not a cherub. Okay, that's a fat naked kid with wings. Okay, that's not the same thing. And so here he is. Mary's with his angel. He said her, "Not be afraid. Do me afraid." Mary's afraid. And he says, "You have found favor with God. You have found favor, and you will conceive." Now look how certain all of this, in the midst of all this, just chaos and random mortality, you will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. Are you writing this down? He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will never end. And I'm telling you, if she had the presence of mind to think about it, this word right in there would have thrown her off. Whoa, wait a minute. His kingdom will never end? Angel, I don't know if you're paying any attention, but do you not realize the nation of Israel has not been an independent kingdom for 500 years? And you're telling me the son of mine is going to have a kingdom that never, ever ends? Who would believe that? Who could possibly believe that? I'm just a teenage girl, Angel. I'm going to give you I'm going to have a son who'll grow up and have some kids, and I'll die, and he'll die, and no one will ever know we existed. But she's not worried about the kingdom word. She's worried about something else. Verse 34. How will this be? Mary asked the angel. Says, I'm a virgin. And then, according to Luke, who was writing in a language that was not spoken by Mary and the angel, Luke chooses words that are difficult. Luke chooses words that preachers and theologians, you kind of skip over because you don't want to pause too long on this part of the story, because honestly, it just gets a little weird. But Mary asked the question that any teenage girl would ask when she was told, "You're going to have a baby while remaining a virgin." And so very delicately, I suppose, the angel says, "Mary, the Holy Spirit will come over you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born," this is awesome. First century, Luke's writing this down as he interviewed these eyewitnesses. "So the Holy One will be born, and he will be called the Son of God." Now, let's just do a quick survey. Everybody, please, before you came in here today, and if you're listening, before you came in today, before you heard me read that, how many of you ever heard the phrase Son of God associated with the name of Jesus? See, that's exactly what he said was going to happen. 2,000 years later, when we hear Jesus, Son of God, that does not surprise you. But do you know how surprising, you know how blasphemous that would have sounded to Mary? I mean, for us, we're used to it. We know that he's the Son of God. We use that phrase. But Mary had never heard that before. Mary, teenage girl, you're going to have a son, and he's going to have a reputation, he's going to be Son of God. And it happened, and here we are halfway around the world, and that's not a surprise to any of you. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to. There's a certainty again, is going to have a child in her old age. And she who is said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail. Now, here's what we can really get our arms around on this story. There were about 400, a little more than that, but about 400 years since the Jews had heard from God. And he shows up and tells this to Mary. Theologians call it the 400 years of silence. Okay? Now, there is a silence in the world because during those 400 years, some amazing things had happened. Babylonian Empire rose up, and everybody thought Babylon's the greatest forever. It wasn't. And Babylon, because the Persian Empire rose up and destroyed the Babylonian Empire. And everybody thought, well, the Persian Empire will be forever. And they lasted about 400 years. And for about 400 years, in other words, people were born and died here in that period, and they just died, and they thought, well, Persia is forever. But they weren't, because Alexander the Great came along, and it was the Greeks' time to rule. And everybody thought, well, Greece is forever, and look what Alexander the Great has accomplished in his short lifetime. But then his world, his empire was split up, and eventually Rome came along. And when Mary was living in the midst of her life, everyone thought Rome is forever. And this silly little angel says to Mary, no, your son's going to have a kingdom, and his kingdom will last forever and ever and ever and ever and ever without end. And everyone in the world said, no, 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 Rome is forever and ever, just like we thought Greece was forever and ever, like we thought the Persians were forever and ever, just like we thought the Babylonians would be around forever and ever. And it's like God shows up in history and says, you don't understand. This isn't about the plans of man. This is about the will of God, and this will transpire. And every one of those kingdoms and every one of those empires came, and they went by my declaration, says God. And while you look at the details and while you look at the history, see my hand, God says. But understand, God says, life is not random. That I am a God of purpose and everything happens according to my will. I mean, think about it. Why the Roman Empire? Well, Rome conquered Israel, conquered the known world. What did they do? Does anybody know what Rome was famous for? They built roads everywhere. Why is that important? Well, how did Paul get the gospel to Spain and Rome and Greece? Traveling on those roads that Rome built. How did everybody understand him? By the Greek language that Alexander the Great spread as he conquered the world. Guess what, guys? All of that random change of government was all God planning it out so that when time came, the gospel would spread like wildfire. It was a common language that everyone spoke, and there was a road system and safety traveling those roads that didn't exist 400 years earlier. Now, Mary's life, it went back to her normal. Well, it actually went subnormal because she's pregnant. The angel goes away, and what we're told and what Luke could discover, and I bet Luke interviewed Mary because John was taking care of Mary at the time. And according to Mary, historical record, the angel Gabriel never showed up to Mary again. But I promise you, she wished she'd show up and explain this to her parents. I mean, picture your child coming home and saying, guess what, Mom? God's angel Gabriel showed up, pregnant, but I'm still a virgin. You know what her parents thought? And I guarantee this is what her parents thought, that her and Joseph had violated the betrothal. They couldn't wait. Which is why it says that Joseph, not being a harsh man, decided just to put her away rather than have her stoned. Because he could have had her killed. He could have had her destroyed because she was pregnant. And he knew that he hadn't violated her. So therefore, he assumed that she cheated on him. And the angel shows up and says, Joseph, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. For the child she bears is the Son of the Most High. And he will come to save your people, and his name will be called Jesus. And so Joseph marries her. See, that's the part a lot of people miss. Well, they were betrothed, and she found out she's pregnant, and they waited. No, they got married as soon as he decided to take her as his wife. Now, it says they weren't intimate until after the birth of Jesus, but guys, understand the consequences for Joseph in this. It's bad enough that Joseph could have had her stoned. But he comes up and says, no, I'm going to marry her instead. I'm going to take her as my wife. Do you know exactly what the people in the community thought? That Joseph had violated his betrothal. That him and Mary couldn't wait, and they didn't keep themselves pure to marriage. And so that baby was his. Because he didn't wait. It would have ruined his reputation. People would have thought, well, he doesn't have much integrity, he's not pure, he doesn't love the Lord. And Mary also. But they got married. So when they went to Bethlehem, they were a married couple. They were uniquely married, and she'd never been with a man. And she's still pregnant. She's still going to have a child. Mary's life got very, very complicated. She's a pregnant teenager with no explanations to why she's pregnant. And I guarantee you there were days, and for those of you who are, okay, I'm sure there were days when Mary's like, well, Angel, you got to come out here and explain this to my mama and my math teacher because they're looking at me funny. And I'm not about to tell them that there's an angel appeared to me. I need an explanation. And then eventually she meets Joseph, and Joseph gets a little heads up about the whole thing, and they talk about bad timing. Caesar Augustus decrees that everybody got to go home and register for a census. And Joseph says to Mary, I've got bad news, and then I got some really bad news. The bad news is you got to go with me to Bethlehem. And the really bad news is that the best way to get there, you're going to have to ride a donkey, and I know that you're pregnant. And now, Miss Favorite of God. Remember Favorite of God? The angel said it twice. You're a favorite of God, you're special. God knows your name. Miss Favorite of God is going to take a donkey ride for about 80 miles while she's pregnant. And it takes them a long time to get there. It takes them long to get there, and when they get there, man, there's no room at the inn. There's no inn. Now, we've talked about this several times, and we've talked about the culture, and we talked about how small the town of Bethlehem would have been. And even Jerusalem wouldn't have had a hotel. There's no Hilton Hotel of Bethlehem. There's no Days Inn. There's not even a Motel 6. Okay? They did not have hotels. In a culture that prided itself on hospitality, who took in strangers and kept them in their homes, you really think? No. The tradition and the culture would have been that he would have gone to the ancestral home of David's family. An ancestor and a relative who lived in Bethlehem, probably in the ancestral home of his family, and they would take in all the members of their family to stay there while they found a place to live. Now understand, a census wasn't going to happen overnight. This is not a day or 24 hours. It wasn't just down there to fill out a questionnaire. It was, they're going to be several years doing the census. So he gets there. His wife is due. She's just ridden a donkey for 80 miles. They spent days getting there. So here he is on the donkey in Israel, and his wife is ready to give birth. And so there's no room at the inn. Well, the word in the Greek that's actually used there is talking about a room in a house. It's the guest room. Now, it's not a guest room like you and I think of guest room, with a bed and maybe a television and maybe a closet thing up your clothes in. We're talking about a big giant room. Guests came, and it was a large group. They slept on the floor on mats in there. It wasn't high comfort, okay? But that's okay. It wasn't a rich family. So they would have gotten in this room, and the problem was, of course, that everybody else from David's family would have been in the house too. All the relatives who were from Bethlehem had shown up there for the census, wait to be counted. So he decides that a pregnant woman giving birth in the midst of that insanity, there's no room for her there. So they put her in the stable as part of the house. It would have been attached. It probably would have been underground, probably in a cave. It's not what we think of when we see pictures. It's not the manger like we have out in the yard in the church here. Okay, it's not what it looked like. Okay, it would have been underground. It would have been also the pantry, which I always thought was interesting, that, you know, Jesus was born, the bread of life was born where the pantry, the source of life, was, you know, the resources were kept for the family. Which I always thought was very interesting. But Mary gives birth in stable, lays the baby in a feeding trough, in a manger. Angel, she would have said, you didn't tell me about this part, okay? Miss Favorite of God would like an out. I'd like to find a room in the inn. You could have at least reserved a room for us. I mean, the least you could do. I remember, Son of God, reign forever. It's about to birth the special baby. I get there, and you're telling me that not only do I not have that I have to make this trip, there's not even room for me in the place we stay. And her story continues to deteriorate. And you can show up at any point and say, why would God allow this to happen? Why would God allow this random source of events to occur? And then she gets a heads up that Herod finds a king. You know, she gives birth. She's been there for 2 years. Joseph is starting to get himself established. The wise men show up, bring him the gold, frankincense, myrrh. And just so you're aware, the wise men did not show up at the manger. Okay, Mary and Joseph had to live in Bethlehem for a while they were waiting to be counted. This is not modern days. The Romans did not have computers. There was no cell phones. There was no attachments. So they had to count them by going from home to home. And so they had to be in a geographical spot. And once they counted, they didn't want anybody going back until they got the count finished. And the count took 3 or 4 years. So Joseph and Mary had moved to Bethlehem to live there, and he's working, getting himself established. He's got a home. Here's the baby. The word is used is a toddler. And then Herod. They find out. Herod finds out. Herod's angry. He's jealous, and Herod wants his name to be forever and ever. And we come to a tragic part of the Christmas story, and we can't pause and think about it for long because it's so unsettling and has the ability to overpower all the romance that we assemble with Christmas. Because early one morning, as people were waking up, the children up and getting ready for another day, Herod's soldiers barged in the doors, and they rounded up all the kids that were under the age of 2 because they believed Jesus lived there, and they slaughtered every single child 2 years and under. And yeah, their assignment was probably to make sure that they slaughtered the males. The Roman soldiers were thorough, and they would rather go back and report to Herod, yes, we probably killed a few little girls at the same time, but then them going back and say, well, we were afraid, so we missed a few of the little boys. And by the end of the day, every single parent with children 2 years and under had their babies ripped out of their hands and slaughtered in a random, senseless, purposeless expression of jealousy. And for the rest of her life, Mary had lived knowing that whereas God warned me and saved my little boy, God did nothing to rescue the other little children. What's the purpose in that? What was the point in that, God? If you had the presence of mind to warn me, well, you couldn't have sent the angel Gabriel just to kill Herod? Wouldn't there be ways around this? And so they fled. And they run, and they end up 200 miles away in Egypt. And they finally got to Egypt, and they spent time in Egypt. And again, you look at any of these details, it's like, why? What's the point? Why does this seem so random? Why does that fit in? Doesn't make any sense. And then years go by, and Mary would experience the most unimaginable pain and sorrow that any mother would ever experience as she stood outside a courtyard and heard her firstborn beat with an inch of his life. And she saw the gore, and she smelled it, and she saw her son with the crown of thorns in his scalp and forced to carry on his cross to die an imaginable death, and most death possible. And the Romans had perfected the art of crucifixion to make sure a criminal lived as long as he could possibly live, to be an example as long as he possibly could be. And his mother watched her son die. And we romanticize it, and it all worked out. But she didn't know any of that. She stood there and watched it. This is highly favorable of God. Miss, the Lord is with you. Miss, in his kingdom shall reign. He will reign forever and ever, and his kingdom shall come to an end and come to no end. In those moments, it was just another random act of Roman violence with no good in sight, and yet God had not lost control. And this is the very epicenter of God's activity. The very moment when it looked like everything was lost, and God had lost control, and was at the crosshairs of God's greatest involvement in the world, where he sent his son into the world to pay for our sins. The thing in you that wants order, the thing in you that wants purpose, the thing in you that wants everything to work out for good, it somehow makes sense. That's the thumbprint of God. And on Christmas, we are reminded that even when it seems random, even when it seems purposeless, even when it seems to be no redeemable good, that it's still God's purpose. At Christmas, we're reminded that God is with us. And that thing in you, that thumbprint of God in you that wants to fit together, is confirmed as Christmas, as God sent his son into this world, to seemingly purposely world, to extraordinary thing. Years later, about 25 years later, the Apostle Paul, with the advantage of hindsight, would look back at all of this and the life of Jesus and the resurrection and the time with Peter and all the disciples, and he would write letters. And in one of those letters, a letter to the Christians in Ephesus, here's what he wrote. In him, we are also made God's heritage, and we obtained an inheritance, for we have been foreordained, chosen, and appointed beforehand, in accordance with his purpose, who works out everything in agreement with the counsel and the design of his own will. I want it to make sense, for harmony with the purpose of his will. Mary didn't say it exactly. It was so technical. When the angel Gabriel finished with Mary, when the angel Gabriel finished telling Mary this is what's going to happen, and this is what you got to look forward to, of course, she didn't know any details. She didn't know about the donkey ride. She didn't know about Herod. She didn't know about the slaughter. She didn't know the one day she would watch her son taken away from her and crucified. And she didn't know that one day, that he would one day rise from the dead. And she didn't know that 2,000 years later we would gather in her son's name once a week, and in many cases more than once a week, and that 1/3 of the world's population would know his name, and when they heard her son's name, they would think, Son of God. And she didn't know any of that. So at the end of her conversation with the angel, she said what I hope you can say, and I can say. And it's something we can say looking back in history, because we know what's come before us, and we know what's coming. But listen to what Mary says. Listen to the faith in this. And Mary said, Behold, I am the handmaiden of the Lord. Let it be done to me according to what you have said. And the angel left her. You get that? You get what Mary's saying there? Guys, what we need to learn to say? We don't understand. All this is insane. But yeah, she says, yes, God. Let it be done according to me, according to what you have said. I obey. I trust the Lord. I am the Lord's servant, and be it unto me according to your word. You know what the big takeaway for me from this was? I don't know what you've been told about faith and how faith has been defined for you. Maybe you grew up in a church and you haven't been taught that faith is what moves God. But I don't think it's what it is. Perfect faith is to respond to the seemingly random events of life as if they are part of the perfect plan of God. Faith doesn't move God. Faith moves us. Perfect faith is the faith that always says, yeah, we met just like I planned. Yeah, we got engaged just like I planned. Yeah, we got